I tried to create two stacks of games that I thought were mere images of each other somewhat to see which one people would be more interested in playing. It's a weird new segment I'm trying out. Let's talk about it.
What does that even mean, Bauer?
Hi there, YouTube. I'm back again today for a new segment called Balancing Games, where I bring you two kind of equal piles of games, and you decide which one of those two games in the comments below you would rather have. And my goal is to have that number be as close as possible. So let's talk about our two separate teams, and we're going to go game by game by game on both sides. So first, on the left side, I have what I'm calling Team Lord of the Rings pile, and on the right side, we have Team Pandemic pile, which is why we're going to start off with our first category, Historical Cooperative Game. So we'll start on the Lord of the Rings side. And gather around, children, because we've got one of the original cooperative games. I think this might be the original co-op game from Reiner Knizia. That is J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. This is for 2 to 5 players. It's a delightful cooperative game that's still rated in the top 1,000. And I'm going to include 2 expansions, Friends and Foes and Sauron, one of which adds a one versus all element to this otherwise cooperative game, and one of them which adds some pretty cool asymmetric abilities. Now, on the flip side, in the Team Pandemic pile, historical for a very different reason, though, is I feel Pandemic is one of those games that really was a pioneer for hobby games in the stores. I remember seeing this in Target for the first time and flipping out because one of our games was there. And this one's going to include Pandemic, the On the Brink expansion, and the In the Lab expansion. So you're getting one of those cooperative games with some meaty chunks of expansion, one of which, once again, which adds one versus all elements to the game, and one of which adds more asymmetric player powers. So now we're going to do a snake draft kind of thing, and we're going to go to our next category, which is off the beaten path deck building games. And for Team Pandemic, we're going to bust out Trains along with the Trains Coastal Tides expansion. If you never played Trains, it feels a lot like Dominion, but there's a board where you place train tracks. It's super cool. The Coastal Tides expansion adds more cards and more boards for you to play on. I personally think it's a fantastic combination of deck building and playing on a board. Moving on to Team Lord of the Rings, we got Vikings Gone Wild, the board game with the Masters of Element expansions here. And this is the number 1197 rated board game of all time. It combines resource management along with deck building, and you construct buildings in your area. It's super cool. It has a lot of things from deck building games, and it just kind of mushes them all together really, really well. It has a spectacular Rodney Smith Watch It Played video, and it'll be mentioned quite a few times when he is, a potential factor in which pile you're going to pick. And it just takes a great game to another level when you get that game in that expansion. And plus, you're not just busting out Dominion. You're one of the, Trains. That's a weird one. And we all like having those hoity-toity board games sometimes, don't we? Speaking of hoity-toity board games, next we're going to go to our highly respected Euro game with a delightful expansion category. Because we're going to be talking about one of my favorite games of all time, Vitivulture. This is for 2 to 6 players, ages 13 plus. But we're going to be throwing in the absolutely delightful Tuscany expansion, which, let me tell you, when this dropped, it rocked people's world. There's 12 separate modules to play through in here. You can mix it and match it into this absolutely spectacular game about winemaking, which does one of the best jobs of any Euro game I've ever played at making the mechanisms fit the theme of the game oh so well. And that's why it's the number 254 rated game of all time. In the Essential Edition, which pretty much takes some of the best stuff out of the Tuscany expansion, a couple minor rule tweaks, is the number 33 game of all time. So we're talking about some serious heavy hitter board gamage stuff. Not to mention, there's a Rodney Smith How to Play video, which we all love so much. And I think, it's a really interesting comparison to the other game that we have in the hoity-toity Euro game category on Team Pandemic, which is Orleans, where the theme is, not so heavily pronounced, but Orleans. This one's from Tasty Minstrel Games. It's now from Capstone Games, but this is the number 30 game of all time, and in my personal opinion, it has the greatest expansion in the history of boxes. That's Orleans Invasion, the big expansion, which adds a cooperative element. I think it's the best cooperative Euro game ever. Just quite frankly, it's absolutely spectacular. Plus, Rodney Smith video on the Orleans as well. I mean, come on. It's bag building, perfected, great components, Excellent game. Easy to teach, I think, as well, even without that video. But what if you're having a big get-together and you need a 7-player game? Well, next we're going to talk about our Gateway-esque 7-player game category. Representing Team Lord of the Rings, we got Seven Wonders, one of the granddaddy gateway games, in my opinion. I imagine this has brought in 1 million people into the hobby since it was released nearly 13 years ago. This one has delightful drafting from my favorite game designer of all time, and Antoine Bauza, and it also has tons of content that you could potentially explore, adding more and more expansions into this if you want, and it has a Rodney Smith how to play video as well. What possibly could you want? More than that, well, if you're on Team Pandemic, you might want Between Two Cities from Stonemaier Game, which adds a solo mode, which I gotta say, I actually do enjoy the solo mode in this one. This is the number 747 game of all time. It has a Rodney Smith play to how video, and it has one of the coolest mechanisms of all time in it, as you're building a city with the player on your left and the player on your right at the same time. So there's a lot of collaboration between the person to your left and the person to your right, which I feel makes this game so much easier to learn, as you naturally have two people on your team when you play that want to see you and your city succeed. Just an absolutely delightful design. Between Two Cities. But you can't just have games about stuff. You gotta have games about words. So the next category is some of my favorite gamery word style games. And I'm gonna lead off with my personal favorite word game of all time, Letter Jam from CGE, currently rated as the number 845 game of all time. It's a word game with deduction, with some interesting, it gives you really clever feels, as you don't know the letter in front of you, but you can see all the letters of everyone else in front of you, and you have to try and make a word that's going to help those people know what the letter is in front of you. And it's just, it's so delicious. It's one of my favorite party games of all time. You got to try out Letter Jam. Just flat out. It's so darn good. Not trying to tip the scales to Team Pandemic. Once again, I'm trying to make these as even possible. But dang it, I better blow up some smoke on Letter Tycoon, which is from Team Lord of the Rings. And I got to say, this is an absolutely delightful party game as well. And what I love about this particular party game, which is currently rated number 2,524, that is too low in my opinion. It should be much higher. This one allows you to spell words and then purchase the letters. And by purchasing the letters, they can give you special abilities. Also, they give you the rights to that letter, which means if someone else uses that letter when they spell a word, then you get paid for that, which can offset one of my biggest problems with word games, is that if you're not on the same even skill level when it comes to a word game, a lot of times word games will fall to your face. But with Letter Jam being cooperative and Letter Tycoon having that unique aspect to it, neither one of them does, and they're both spectacular letter games. But we're going to snake it back over here to our next category, which is delicious dice placement games. So for Team Lord of the Rings, we have Kingsburg, and I'm going to bust out the second edition. This one was released all the way back in 2007. The second edition, I think, was released in like 2017. But this is a dice placement game, and this particular box has all the extra added goodies, expansions in there, and it's a really simple game as you're trying to collect resources by rolling dice and appealing to people that are in the kingdom, and they'll get you these resources, and then you can build all these cool buildings, and all these cool buildings will give you special abilities. And I stinking love this game. Not trying to put my toe on the scale, but Kingsburg second edition, it's hot. But maybe you want to be a little bit more of a historian, and you want to see one of the granddaddies of all a Kickstarter, and that's why on Team Pandemic we have Alien Frontiers. This was released in 2010. You're like, well, Kickstarter was around in 2010. Yeah, it was around in 2010, and this is one of the first hobby games that really got put onto the map thanks to Kickstarter for not sucking. It's delightful. It also has tons of expansion content that you can explore if you'd like to. It's the number 303 game of all time. It's dice placement. It's out in space. You're trying to do spacey stuff. It's delightful. But now we only have one more game left. Continuing on Team Pandemic side, we have Two Rooms in a Boom, because our next category is the large group party game. And Two Rooms in a Boom accommodates 7 to 20 players. It's the number 1,077 game of all time. It has tons of replayability, and many people think it is a better refinement of another very popular game that we're going to talk about, which is Werewolf. And while they're not the same game, Two Rooms in a Boom, taking away the player elimination, was a big thing for large group social deduction fans, because you think about it, before Two Rooms and a Boom came out, there wasn't too many other large group seduction games. Not seduction games, that's a very different topic. There was Mafia and Werewolf, which are pretty much just step cousins of each other. Two Rooms and a Boom kicked in the door. It was a great Kickstarter project, and this is a hell of a thing to add to your collection if you're Team Pandemic. But final game in Team Lord of the Rings, we have the Ultimate Werewolf Deluxe Edition for Kickstarter. Now, a different Ultimate Werewolf Deluxe Edition thing is rated as the number 1251 game of all time. This one has more stuff in it. I will say the only thing that this doesn't have is the cool little items that you can add if you're like a diehard werewolf fan. But this one goes, what is it? It's just stupid amount. It's like 6 to 30, yeah, it's 5 to 75 players. And if you can get a group of people who love to play werewolf, you can keep them coming back for years and years at a time with this one. It's not that difficult to moderate. They got some helpful things in here to help you moderate. And at the end of the day, which pile would you rather have as your game collection? Let me know in the comments below. And which game was the one that tilted the scale that direction? This video is brought to you by all of my amazing Patreon supporters, and I would love it if you would join their ranks and have your name immortalized in the end of many of my videos for the end of time. But consider for only $1 a month, and as always, thanks for stopping by.